Hi, I'm Tom Saunders. Sorry about the informal beginning. I am President and CEO of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and we appreciate that you've joined us today for this webinar. We have an interesting topic today. It's about a rare and threatened species, the Eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, which is rarer in this state than in its habitat overall, but threatened overall. And it's not only, our presentation is not only about the species, but about the conservation work that we and partners are doing at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to protect it. It's a fascinating species. It's very small for a rattlesnake. It lives in very specific kinds of terrain and in very few, and at this point, isolated locations in Pennsylvania. And we've done some land protection work and land restoration to improve the habitat for it. It's been an ongoing project for a number of years. So this work comes out of the Conservancy's Natural Heritage Program. I suspect that anybody listening to this webinar is pretty familiar with the Conservancy, but as you know, we have several different programs. We do land conservation work, and we have protected about 300,000 acres through that program. We have a watershed restoration and protection program, and that group of staff protects, cleans, restores streams and rivers all over our region. We have the Natural Heritage Program, our topic today, and that group works on rare, threatened, and endangered species. But it also gives science background and sort of depth of knowledge to all the work we do. It informs our other programs. So it makes our land conservation and our watershed work more powerful, that it has the good science behind it from the Heritage Program. We have the Community Greening Program, and that group of staff plants urban trees. We've planted 41,000 trees in Pittsburgh and the communities around it, about 30,000 street trees and a lot of park and green space trees. And it also does the 130 gardens that you see around the region. And then our probably best known part of our organization is Falling Water. And there we not only have that site that we preserve and we share with the public, but we have the 5,000 acres of Bear Run that's protected around it, which provides that wonderful forest setting for Falling Water. For today's presentation, we're going to focus on some of the expertise in the Natural Heritage Program, and our speaker is Ryan Miller with that program. Ryan is an expert on snakes, and he's specifically an expert on this particular species that we're going to hear about now. And working with our good partners in this work, he's been leading our conservation work to help us to protect properties, improve the habitat for it, and protect the snake. The one thing I'll mention before turning it over to Ryan is feel free to put questions in the question and answer mode. And if we have some time at the end, we'll be glad to take your questions. So Ryan, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Miller. I am the senior zoologist based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, here at the Western PA Conservancy. And I work with the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. I've been at the Conservancy for 20 years. I started as an assistant zoologist with a seasonal position and worked my way up and gained a foothold through some of this work with the Massasauga and the Conservancy. And it's really expanded, as you will see over the presentation today. It's really expanded over the past 25 years and the 20 years that I've been with the program. Just a little bit about the Heritage Program to start. The Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program is a partnership of multiple organizations and agencies, and they gather the location and status of important natural resources and essentially endangered species, endangered plants, animals, and ecosystems. All the data that is collected between the agencies and the Conservancy is fulfilled through the partnership and analyzed and collected into a database of the location of those species, also known as PNDI. the Heritage Program collaborates also with federal partners like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to protect the federally threatened and endangered species that are within that data system. We also provide and analyze data to help guide conservation and land use planning, and Tom alluded to that a little bit earlier, where we will provide information to land organizations to guide their conservation work throughout the state of Pennsylvania. Again, just a reminder to put any questions that you have from this presentation in the questions and answers or comments throughout the webinar. Thank you. In this presentation, we're going to go over the Eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. We're going to learn about its life history. We're going to talk about the projects that have happened at the Conservancy, at the Heritage Program over the past 25 years. And we're going to learn about what we've done to help the snake in Pennsylvania. The Eastern Massasauga, the name Massasauga comes from a Chippewa Native American name, means great river mouth. And it's believed that the snake's habitat in the deltas and open areas where river mouths create deltas and large flat areas of land. And that's where the snakes can be found in some areas of North America. So it's believed that that's where that name came from the Native American origin. They're a relatively small pit viper rattlesnake. They have a rattle on the tip of their tail. They have an overall length, or snout vent length and overall length, that barely reaches 2 feet, sometimes a little bit over 2 feet. They inhabit old field prairie habitats and wetlands with access to the water table, and crayfish burrows are often present, which gives them access to that water table for hibernation. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. It's important to note that while they are a venomous species, one of 3 venomous species in Pennsylvania, the other 2 species being the copperhead and the timber rattlesnake, the Massasauga is extremely shy, very small and non-aggressive. And essentially it relies on its camouflage, the grays and brown colors down at ground level, to stay hidden as predators and threats walk past. I can't tell you or impress upon folks how often I've essentially stepped right over the rattlesnakes and right over a Massasauga, and they won't even rattle. They just lay still and won't do anything. They don't strike to defend themselves if you were to accidentally step over them. And they just sit there and try to stay hidden. Now, once you interact with a Massasauga, then they will try and defend themselves like any other wild animal would. The Massasauga is commonly mistaken with other snakes. I get a lot of emails and phone calls throughout the active season with the snakes being misidentified or mischaracterized through being essentially mistaken for other snakes. The most common snake in the top right is the Eastern black rat snake. And black rat snakes, some folks say, oh, they're a black snake, so they're the large 6-foot black snake that everybody's used to. Well, when they're small, they're juveniles, they have a pattern that closely resembles the Eastern Massasauga that you see down here in the bottom left. Other snakes that have a similar pattern and have been mistaken for Massasaugas are the milk snake and the northern water snake, all of which can be found in similar habitats and have been found in the same places as Massasaugas. So just food for thought. There's a lot of misidentification going on over the years, and I understand that there are phobias of snakes, but one tip that I can tell folks is if you encounter a snake and you're not sure where it is, just take a photograph and email or call a local herpetologist or expert and have them identify it for you. That's the best way to do it. And the best way for the snake and the best way for you. I would strongly discourage handling any snakes that you're not comfortable with or killing them wantonly. because these snakes are important. All snakes are important in the ecosystem. I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. The Eastern Massasauga has a yearly activity pattern. They hibernate over winter, and they come out of their hibernation in spring. They're very hungry. They begin foraging and looking for small mammals and prey items. They disperse from their hibernation area in probably mid-May, and then they set up shop in their habitat, which is open old field habitats. They breed in late summer. They give birth in late summer. And then they tend to migrate back towards their wetland habitats, where they go back to hibernation, stop eating, and go underground for the winter. Essentially, it adds up to 6.5 months of activity, followed by 5.5 months of hibernation. During hibernation, they must stay above freezing. They cannot freeze whatsoever. Their body temperatures tend to stay in the 10 to 17 degrees Celsius range, which essentially is just above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And they tend to hibernate in groundwater. And they utilize crayfish burrows, root systems, mammal burrows, foundation cracks, and rock crevices to get down to that groundwater. In places where the groundwater is close to the surface, but still underneath, where it doesn't freeze over the winter. And in some cases, it even flows underground. The Massasauga does overwinter individually. It's not a communal snake where like a garter snake, where you could see quite a few individuals coming out of hibernation together. Typically, they go down in one burrow and they stay in that burrow individually. We have seen instances in Pennsylvania, we had 2 or 3 in the same burrow, but that's extremely rare. And on the right, you can see a picture of a crayfish burrow. It's essentially a mud chimney with a hole in the middle. I would liken the hole to about the size of a ping pong ball or a golf ball. And you can see how it's perfect for the snake to go up and down into the water table for hibernation, where they won't freeze over winter. The Massasauga's diet consists of small rodents. When they're juveniles, they have been known to eat other small snakes and frogs. And the photograph on the right is what you see, caudal luring, where that is a juvenile Massasauga. And that's probably smaller than the size of a tea plate right there coiled up. And what you see there is the juvenile snake using the yellow tip on its tail to lure in insects, frogs, and other snakes to go ahead and try and maybe attack that yellow tip of the tail, and then they will essentially get eaten by the Massasauga. It's called caudal luring, where they utilize their tail to draw in prey items. As they get older, they go to an almost exclusive small rodent diet, like deer mice and voles out in their habitat, in grassland habitats, prairie habitats. The snakes, obviously, like any other animal, do die. What we found is they get hit by automobiles quite a bit while crossing roads. There's been instances of human persecution, especially here in Western Pennsylvania. It's well documented that the snakes in farm areas have been killed en masse, especially during hay cutting season in the early to mid 1900s. Farmers would count how many Massasaugas they would kill and brag about the numbers. And those can be found in some of the old notebooks and articles throughout history in Western Pennsylvania. There are diseases going around inside the Massasauga population, most notably within the past 15 years, snake fungal disease, a disease that grows on their skin and between their skin layers. It's a fungus that grows between their skin layers, has been found in other populations further west where they live, but it has not been detected in Massasaugas in Pennsylvania. It has been detected in other snakes in Pennsylvania, but not in Massasaugas, which is very lucky for the Massasaugas. They do get preyed on by other predators. Most of their predators are aerial raptors, aerial birds of prey, foxes, opossums, skunks, weasels, other snakes like the black racer snake, feral cats, and turkeys. Their range throughout North America can be categorized by the photograph to the right here. And their DNA analysis in the early 2000s indicates that the Missouri River divides the populations between the eastern Massasauga and the western Massasauga, completely separate species. And they inhabit a wide variety of habitats throughout their range. Most notably in New York, it's known that their habitat in New York is a bog wetland habitat where they sit sometimes on floating mats of bog vegetation. And then as you work your way out through the West and Midwest, they tend to gravitate towards prairie type habitats. In Pennsylvania, you see a little peninsula there where they have been known to live in Pennsylvania. It's called the Prairie Peninsula. It's where we believe glaciers once covered northwestern Pennsylvania, a little section of northwestern Pennsylvania, and essentially scraped off the topsoil as they receded and left a barren landscape that created prairies back after the last ice age. And those are the areas that the Massasauga colonized after the last ice age. Their conservation status in North America and the United States, it is a threatened species, a federally threatened species. It was listed in 2016. It is protected throughout its range in all the states and provinces in Canada. It is protected. It cannot be wantonly killed at all. It was listed as state endangered in Pennsylvania in 1978 when our state endangered species program began. Only disjunct populations remain throughout its range. And this photograph here in the slideshow shows that there are places where they once were that they are not. And the dots on the map where they do live are very disjunct and broken up throughout their range. Most of that is from habitat destruction, alteration, succession, and human persecution. And we're going to revisit that here a little bit, especially when it comes to Pennsylvania. In early 2000, now that I taught you about the snakes or told you about the snakes, we're going to talk about the work that WPC and the Heritage Program has done over the past 25 years. It started with the inventory project in early 2000 with a couple other scientists and zoologists, one of which was Charles Beer, who's still associated with the Conservancy, a great naturalist, a great scientist for Western Pennsylvania. And they began to go out and visit some historic sites and look for the snakes in Western Pennsylvania. The goals when they started that inventory project in 2000 was to determine the extant range and current status of the Massasauga in Pennsylvania, and then contribute what we know in Pennsylvania to the North American population and kind of connect the dots and see how everybody's doing and see how everything fits. The methods for this inventory were to gather location information. We looked at the Heritage Program database, old reports from the database and in scientific journals. We talked to state and federal officials that get reports from folks. And we went out and engaged with private landowners where the snakes once were. From there, we went out and identified these areas, and we went out and surveyed these areas. We surveyed historic sites, areas of good habitat adjacent to these historic areas, and we went out and found new sites that we believed had all the components needed to house the Massasauga within its former range. The methods we used during our surveys, we used visual encounter surveys, which essentially is just walking through habitat with your nose to the ground, hoping to see a snake out in the grass. We deployed cover boards, which essentially are plywood boards to give a break in the monotonous grass prairie type habitats where the snakes would be attracted to the boards to sun themselves and bask especially during the morning hours. And then they use the boards as cover and go underneath during the day when it got too hot. I believe road surveys were also involved during some of these surveys as well, where we cruise areas, especially on warm summer nights when the snakes would be out on the roads basking or trying to get warmth from the roads or just actively crossing the roads. The results from the inventory, 69 locations were visited and almost 800 search hours were deployed within those locations, almost 800 hours out there in the habitat. 532 boards were put out in the habitat as well. Of the 63 historic occurrences in Western Pennsylvania, dots on the map, 2 were believed to be erroneous, misidentified snakes, or moved area, like snakes were moved to an area like in a bale of hay, I believe is one of the stories. A snake was caught in a bale of hay. 38 of those sites were extirpated, 19 were doubtful, and 4 were only extant. Only 4 populations remained in Western Pennsylvania. And during those surveys, 124 individual snakes were encountered. This is a series of slides that shows the decline of the populations in Western Pennsylvania. This is the year 1900. The next slide is when Dr. Howard Reinert did his surveys in 1978 for his master's degree. Howard Reinert came back in 1990 and surveyed again and found only that these were extant or possibly extant, and then the results from our survey. So just to flip through them real quick, again, when you flip through them real quick, it's quite a drastic decline from the year 1900 till 2005 when we completed the inventory. Reasons for the loss, reasons for that decline. We found that before 1978, before Dr. Reinert did his study, road construction killed a few populations. A few populations were dammed and flooded over by lakes, most notably Pymatuning Reservoir and Lake Arthur in Butler County. Development, some sites were just developed, and human persecution. Again, the farmers going out and during hay season and encountering a bunch of snakes in their hay pasture and killing them. After 1978, after Dr. Reinert did his study, we noticed a trend in sites disappearing from woody vegetation succession. Again, from development, some sites were still lost due to development. Some sites are still being wiped off by human persecution. And a new thing came along, resource exploration. There were some populations that were lost due to runoff from strip mines, coal mines. Acid mine drainage, essentially, polluted some wetlands and killed a few populations of snakes. And this is a graph that shows the impacts, those types of impacts that I just mentioned, and the sites that are impacted from them. And you can see on the right is woody vegetation succession is one of the main impacts. And it still is the main impact to our last remaining 4 sites today. After we found where the 4 remaining populations were in Western Pennsylvania, our partners and us decided that a radiotelemetry study was warranted to get an idea on how the snakes utilize those last remaining habitats and how those impacts like woody vegetation succession were impacting the snakes and their daily activities and daily movements. A herpetologist and zoologist named Ben Jelen came in from Illinois, and he headed up the telemetry and hired myself and a few other folks to work as telemetry technicians, and that's how essentially I got started with the program. We worked to monitor snakes at 3 of the 4 remaining populations. We monitored males, gravid females, non-gravid females, and gravid means pregnant, and neonates. They were monitored every other day during the active season, and we checked on them every week during an overwintering period when they were in hibernation. We rotated the tracking times between morning, afternoon, and evening. We check on them at different times. And we partnered with the Pittsburgh Zoo to do the transmitter surgeries. We implanted the transmitters inside of the snake's bodies. We used them because they had surgical expertise. They had the equipment to do all the work. They had a sterile environment to do that work. And they were also able to check on the general health of the individuals that we brought to the zoo for surgery. Again, the surgeries were done at the zoo. We would go out and find an individual that we wanted to do put a transmitter in, and put the snake to sleep using gas, so that it could go through a surgery. The zoo veterinarians would insert the transmitter and then suture the incision closed, and the snake was good for up to 18 months. It's important to note that the transmitters were extremely small. They were about the size of a lima bean, and they were temperature sensitive. So we could tell how warm or cold the snake was by how often the beeps were coming through over the radio. And this is kind of a neat technology that was used at the time to tell how hot or cold the snakes were by how fast the beeping was. We also deployed a new technology at the time where we had neonatal transmitters. And those little transmitters were about the size of a pinky nail, and they were glued to neonates using veterinarian adhesive vet bond. And the antenna wire was shortened so there wouldn't be any entanglement. And we were able to track those neonates until they shed their skins. And essentially, the transmitter would just slide off because they shed. Every time we encountered a snake, be it with radio telemetry or just going out and surveying, anytime we found one, we took in a massive amount of data. We took environmental data, which is essentially the weather, morphological data where we weighed and measured the snake. We would mark it with a pit tag, which is essentially a microchip that's used on dogs and cats, home for pets at home for identification purposes if they were to run away. We use that same technology for the snakes. We took temperatures, we noted their behavior, we noted their reproductive status. If we found a dead snake, we tried to determine its cause of death. We took blood and DNA samples. We noted the habitat, the cover it was under, the canopy amount, how many woody stems it was nearby, what types of trees and shrubs it was near, and if it was near a burrow or other type of retreat. And then we took GPS coordinates for each snake that we encountered. The results of that was a lot of data sheets that are essentially housed in binders over my desk, but we also entered them into a data sheet, data management program to analyze all the results. We encountered 257 individual Massasaugas from 2005 to 2006. And we had 2,524 individual data sheets, individual encounters. Every time we checked on a snake with radio telemetry, or anytime we found a snake out in the wild, we filled out one of those data sheets. It added up to 2,500 some records. 42 of the 61 snakes were tracked for at least 30 days, giving us a good idea over a month of what the snakes were doing. And it equated to 51 seasons, including 9 snakes that we followed for 2 seasons. We did 7 non-gravid snakes. We followed 17 gravid snakes, 12 males, and 15 neonates. From all the data that we collected, we were able to figure out their spatial ecology. We were able to find out their seasonal movements, which I alluded to earlier. In the spring, They're down in the wetlands near the crayfish burrows or near hibernacula areas. In the summer, they move out of the wetland up into upland habitats and begin to forage in dry, brushy fields. And then in the fall, we saw a gradual return to hibernation areas. We also found that their home ranges are small. The average home range of a Pennsylvania Massasauga is 3.8 acres. The average seasonal movement over the distance of a snake is 255 meters, only 800 feet. Now, it's important to note that that could be because some of our sites are very small areas of habitat that remain because they are very enclosed in woody vegetation and surrounded by woody vegetation. And there's only a few of these areas that are very large and vast where they can go off and roam. Now, that's the important thing to note. The other really neat thing that we learned from the radio telemetry is displayed here in this slide is some of the neonate patterns. And what you see on this slide is the stars where the mother Massasauga gave birth. And then we see a dispersal of the individual neonates, kind of like in a shotgun pattern. And each color line is a different snake. And as they disperse from the birthing site, they go off and feed in the brush. And then you can see them follow the lines and you can see them return to the birthing site or nearby the birthing site. And we believe that so they could pick up the scent of the female once again and follow her back down over the hill into the wetland area to find suitable hibernation area. And it's really interesting patterns that we observed just from doing this radio telemetry activity. We found that Pennsylvania's Massasaugas have an average body temperature of 27 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer, which is very warm. Their habitats are very warm. There should be or is very few trees in the habitats that they like. So it's going to be warm. Their body temperatures swung from 5.6 to 40 degrees Celsius. That's 42 degrees during the winter when they're in and under the ground to 105 in the summer. It was the hottest we ever found an active snake. We also found that gravid females are almost always warmer than males. And that's due to the fact that they have to develop, they're a cold-blooded animal, and they have to develop the embryos inside of their bodies. And they tend to bask a lot longer and more out in the open in their habitat. Reproductive ecology, we learned that females in Pennsylvania reproduce biennially. They're gravid one year and not gravid the other. We found 9 female snakes over 2 years and indicated that snakes were gravid one year and not gravid the next. So every other year they give birth. And in the year they're not giving birth is the mating year. And this slide shows a male on the right scent trailing and following a female during the active breeding season. We also found that the females achieve sexual maturity at around 3 years, 36 months, and they give birth the year after at 48 months or 4 years. We noticed some growth patterns in our snakes in Pennsylvania. Neonates averaged approximately 18 centimeters or 7 inches, and they weighed a mean of 10 grams or 0.3 ounces at birth. Massasaugas shed 3 times a year for their first 2 years, and then they shed twice a year every year after. So if you find a snake and it has 6 rattles or more on its rattle, it's probably sexually mature. And adults averaged 51 centimeters or 20 inches. During our study, we did encounter our snakes dying. We had 6 deaths from predation. 5 were from raptors, 4 of which I believe were from a single great horned owl. And we know this because he coughed up the owl pellets at the base of a large oak tree adjacent to one of our sites. And one of our transmitters was in one of those owl pellets. 4 of our raptor deaths were gravid females, the females that tend to stay out in the open more to bask. 2 up and disappeared. We do not know where they went or what happened to their transmitters or where they ended up. 2 were hit by vehicles. 1 contracted an unknown disease and passed, and 2 neonates passed. 1 was stepped on and 1 was just found dead. And we had 2 transmitter complications during surgery or infections from transmitters. After the radiotelemetry study, we got a really good picture from all that data of what the snakes liked and what their ideal habitat would be, just from taking all those measurements every time we found a snake. So in 2007, we partnered with Fish and Boat, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and conducted a habitat study where we went out and manipulated occupied sites to see if we could recreate the most ideal habitat for the snakes and what was the most cost effective for landowners and land managers. The common techniques we studied were brush hogging or using a fecon cutter, which is a large cutting head, rotating drum cutting head mounted on the front of a skid steer tractor. We studied prescribed fire. We studied hand cutting using hand tools and weed whackers. And we studied herbicide applications. What we found that works best and is the most cost effective for land managers is when all woody vegetation is cut and pulverized using essentially a fecon cutter, which I just talked about, where we can return the habitat to a mowable state. And it's easier for land managers to maintain it. Those land managers could react to the habitat as it recovers from its initial cut, leaving a mosaic of varying heights of cover and varying species, a diverse set of low-growing species for the snakes and for other wildlife, essentially, early successional habitat. And then we recommended a 3 to 5 year rotational mowing, depending on how fast those areas were overgrown by woody vegetation again. After the habitat study, we pretty much had studied the snakes very extensively after those first 8 or 9 years. And it was time for conservation action. So we worked with state agencies and other partners to put in some good work on the ground where the last 4 remaining populations were. In 2009, we partnered with the Fish and Boat Commission on a landowner incentive program where we wrote habitat management plans for private landowners that had the snakes on their property, free of charge. And they were voluntary. They didn't have to implement any of the recommendations that were in those plans. But we went out, we visited those property owners, we visited the properties, and wrote together, put a pretty comprehensive document together for their property that give recommendations or ideas tailored to their likes, whether it be agriculture or recreation, to benefit them and the snakes at the same time. The landowner incentive program also funded us to develop a brochure for private landowners, anybody that in the public that wanted to learn about the snakes, and it is still publicly available on WPC's website if you wanted to take a look. The landowner incentive program also led to the initial cut and maintenance of 5 properties, 5 private properties, and 40 acres of habitat using private foundation funding. We got a generous donation from private foundation to go out and implement some of those plans with those cooperating landowners that wanted some work done on their property to benefit them and the snakes. It was a great project. Western Pennsylvania Conservancy went out and purchased habitat. From 2012 through 2017, we purchased 3 properties, one of which was 55 acres. And has a history as an old farm. One was 1.4 acres, and it was acquired in an area where there was 2 occupied sites, but not a good corridor between the 2 sites for the snakes to travel from site to site. So we purchased that little parcel and used that as a connector between the sites. And then another small parcel that housed a high quality wetland and some decent upland just adjacent to that wetland with the snakes nearby. Some of the properties that we purchased, those 3 properties that we purchased, weren't in the best shape, so we embarked on a restoration project. They were logged by an Amish group in 2014 using horse logging techniques, which is low impact on the habitat, and therefore the snakes, which are hibernating underground, would not be crushed, or their burrows wouldn't be crushed by heavy equipment. And then those proceeds from that timber sale from that property were contracted to do brush removal, and you essentially hire a Fecon machine to go in and finish the brush removal on the property. And then we came back in 2018 in a partnership with the Game Commission using the VPA HIP program, and they also did an early successional habitat management on one of our properties that benefited game birds and the snakes at the same time. And now we're kind of in maintenance mode with those areas and those properties that we own. And we essentially mow or brush hog the properties with WPC's tractor every 3 to 5 years, depending on the growth. On private properties outside of that LIP program that I mentioned before, we cultivated relationships with other landowners through science. We did the radio telemetry on some private properties and really engaged with folks to show them the snakes on their properties and that the snakes aren't that bad and they're really neat, and we could do some really cool things with the habitats on their properties. Overall, we managed 60 acres total on private property through those engagements. And there were 50 of those acres were signed into a federal agreement through NRCS. It's an easement, and that was signed in 2015. And then we were contracted to restore the habitat on that easement in 2017 as a restoration project. And you could see down below the before on the left and the after on the right. It was completely enclosed canopy with crabapple trees and other brush. And the vegetation was removed by hand and piled up for other wildlife. And then the meadows were restored and the snakes took to them immediately. And then we also received funding to do some maintenance mowing with Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission funds to go back and maintain some of those areas that were cut over the past 10 years. Other cooperation actions that we worked with and we've done with other agencies, when we found this, when snake fungal disease broke out in 2014, we embarked on a large snake fungal disease testing system and shipped samples off to Illinois to get tested. And that was in 2015 and 2016. We advised the DCNR on some habitat expansion projects that they've done on their properties. We advised the Game Commission in the Northwest region where the snakes are on management actions on their properties and state game lands. And we also advised them on property acquisitions that would benefit the snakes, essentially new game lands, game properties that would become game lands. And we guided them through those acquisitions and helped the snakes and get some new game lands on the landscape. We also advised Fish and Boat and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife on habitat management, and we aid them whenever needed in monitoring the last remaining populations. Continuing needs, the work is never done with this species. Habitat restoration is always going to be needed, and the maintenance of those habitats are always going to be needed. There is going to have to be monitoring perpetually for some of these populations so that we know that the snakes are healthy and maintaining good populations. And permanent protection is always the best endpoint. Land acquisitions, be it through the Conservancy or state agencies, where the snakes still remain, those land acquisitions are the best outcome for those snakes, where we can get the property from not being developed or not being destroyed. And I just want to take a second to thank all our agency partners and private partners on the work that we've done over the past 25 years and all the help that they've done with us. And it's been a great partnership. So after all that, just to circle back around, why would we want to do all this work for a rattlesnake, a venomous species on the landscape? I understand that there's a fear for these snakes, but these snakes have an ecological function. They keep rodent populations in check. Again, I told you before that the snakes only eat, especially adult snakes, only eat small rodents on the landscape. Most notably, the deer mouse and the white-footed mouse, which carries Lyme disease. So if we have snakes out eliminating the small rodents that carry Lyme disease, we have lower occurrences of Lyme disease in those areas. The snakes have biomedical benefits. Venomous snakes have biomedical benefits. The Massasauga's smaller cousin, the pygmy rattlesnake, their venom is used in anticoagulants and anti-heart attack medicine, in Tigrelin, which you see in the center of the screen here. So the Massasauga's pygmy rattlesnake cousin, their venom is used for the biomedical field. Who's to know what could be found in the future, or any other venomous snake in the future, the benefits they could provide humankind. They are part of Pennsylvania's natural heritage. They've always been here since the retreat of the glaciers after the Ice Age. So the state mandates and responsibilities to conserve every native species, including this venomous species. I want to highlight one of our new YouTube videos. If you're familiar with the Conservancy's YouTube channel, we had an older video from, I think, 2013. We redid the video, and you can go out in the field with me and a couple other scientists where we capture a couple of Massasaugas and do the pit tagging, where we microchip the snakes. We do a health workup and weigh and measure them, and then re-release them. So at your convenience, visit our YouTube site, Waterland Life, and you could search the title Eastern Massasauga Science and Conservation in Pennsylvania. And that's the conclusion of my portion. I want to hand it over to Jen once again, so she can touch on some things that the Conservancy is involved with, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Wow, that was great. Thanks, Ryan. That was super informative. And I just want to mention that I have been out in the field with Ryan as he pit tagged some of the Massasaugas, and it was fascinating, very informative. And we did film that video of him doing that. And I highly recommend it. It's very interesting to see all the work that's involved and how carefully Ryan and his volunteers go about doing that. So yeah, we're going to give Ryan a break, and then we'll get to your questions. We have several questions in the Q&A. Give Ryan a chance to pull himself together, take a rest, and meanwhile, I'm going to talk to you briefly about some ways you can get involved and support the Conservancy's work. We're very fortunate to have a very knowledgeable and supportive board of directors, as well as several advisory board members for different regions of Western Pennsylvania. And of course, we have thousands of volunteers that make our work possible. If you're interested in volunteering with us, you can check out volunteer opportunities on the homepage of our website, waterlandlife.org, and just scroll down to events and volunteer opportunities. You can help us plant trees, plant gardens, maintain our gardens, build trails on our preserves, help clean up the preserves, pull invasive plants. You can even volunteer at Falling Water in a multitude of ways. Another thing you can do is use community science applications such as iNaturalist and IMAP invasives And when you do that, you're helping provide scientists with data sets. Remember to check out internships and job opportunities for both Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and Falling Water at waterlandlife.org/careers. And remember that we absolutely could not do this work that you just heard about without the support of our donors and members. If you're not a Conservancy member, please consider becoming one by donating today at waterlandlife.org. And I think we're ready to get back to the questions. And remember, if we don't get to all of them, please feel free to email us at info@paconserve.org and use the subject line webinar question. I'll forward those questions to Ryan and he'll answer as best as he can. So I have several, we have a lot of questions, Ryan. So I'm going to try to choose the ones that are specifically relevant to your work and the Massasauga first. We'll get to as many of these as we can. So first of all, are you using iNaturalist as a data source for citing the snakes in range? Do you use iNaturalist for that?
Yeah, as stated before, the Heritage Program dips into all relative applications and data sources, everything from historic journal articles all the way up to the newest and latest and greatest apps where people can submit sightings. So there's that. There's the Pennsylvania Amphibian and Reptile Survey, PARS. We get data from them. All of those apps, the data does eventually make it to the Heritage Program. Yes.
Great. About the these sites where the Massasauga tends to live, is the succession of these sites natural, or is it caused by invasive plants or by human intervention? Or
most of it is natural, and it's mostly native species. One of the worst is aspen trees, which is a wetland or a more wet type tree that prefers wet conditions along the edges of those wetlands where the snakes are. But yeah, most of it's native plants, native trees that essentially are getting into the soil. As the soil has grown since the last ice age or accumulated over the last ice age, it's become more and more suitable for trees and woody vegetation, and it's been a natural process. So yes, we are fighting a natural process by going through and restoring these sites. We are cutting those woody trees back, but Penn's Woods is overtaking these sites, and we are losing early successional habitat at an alarming rate, especially here at the last 4 remaining Massasauga sites.
Okay, that's sort of related to this next question then. Someone was surprised to know that we used to have these in Allegheny County.
Yes.
And wants to know if you can say anything more about that. Maybe, I don't know, location.
Yeah, there was once a historic site in Allegheny County from the Cranberry area, Cranberry Township, on the Butler Allegheny County line. And it was a very large, that area was a very large expansive wetland along the creeks along the stream, the banks of Brush Creek. And it was quite a prolific site around the year 1900. And then over the years, development took over. The Cranberry area took over, and now it's quite a bit of strip malls and box stores.
Okay, so you mentioned the crayfish burrows and the I might mispronounce it, hibernaculum.
Yep, that's right.
So do the snakes go to, when they return? You talked about the their range, and they go out and they come back. Do they go to the same burrow, or do they
Yes.
to the same area?
Their site fidelity is quite high, and they do go out and come back, and we have seen the same individuals utilizing the same burrow year after year, as long as that burrow is still there and still active. It's also important to note that the snakes go down in the crayfish burrow with the crayfish, and they live in the burrow with the crayfish. And at the bottom of the burrow is a chamber that crayfish is excavated. It's about the size of a volleyball or basketball, and it's in the water, like I said before, where the snake can go down and stay in the water throughout the winter and not freeze to death with the crayfish. And they use the same one year after year if it's still there. Yes.
Is that what's called symbiosis, or is that something different?
Symbiosis, I think, is where both animals receive a benefit. I'm
Okay.
not sure what
So
the
the
other
crayfish
term
aren't
is.
really benefiting so much.
Right. Yep.
from that.
Protection, maybe.
Okay. Um, what are the biggest obstacles that you've encountered with landowners or land managers in protecting the snake, and how do you get it? How do you sort of deal with that obstacle?
Well, number one is fear of snakes. And the best way to do that is to show folks one of the snakes and try and explain to them that they're less than 2 feet long. They prefer to hide. They're very timid, and they're not out to get you. And then the other thing is to show them how they bring in a connection between the snakes and their property or their land that they're managing, and show them that, wow, they're utilizing this beautiful wildflower prairie or this little section of property that could be, waist high in wildflowers. And the snakes like it too. It's visually pleasing for the landowner or the land manager, for the public, and it's great for the snakes. And we try and tie in some of those benefits. And we also trying to, we try to find some type of common ground. I know another landowner that I've worked with preferred to hunt upland birds on his property, pheasants and grouse. Those birds prefer early successional habitat. And we kind of tailored his property to maintain the grasses and the grass height and cover height for the birds and for the snakes. And it's kind of a win-win, but always finding that common ground between what the properties owners or property managers like and the snakes like is the key. And just get them out there and get them unafraid of the snakes, and show them to try and get them to appreciate what they have in Pennsylvania at the last 4 remaining sites.
Interesting. Well, I have to say, having been up close with them, they're cute little buggers. This is interesting, and it's kind of related to the landowners a little bit. Mm-hmm. Has a citizen accurately identified and reported a Massasauga somewhere where you didn't know they were present?
In my career over the past 20 years, since 2005, no.
Okay. And I'm assuming that question was related a little bit maybe to using iNaturalist.
Correct.
To keep from interbreeding, are there programs with other states' snake populations to exchange snakes?
Not yet. But I do believe that other states are collaborating on that type of work at this time. And it could be something in the future that Pennsylvania will explore. That's kind of outside of my wheelhouse. That would be something that the Fish and Boat Commission and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would explore and get to do, and where I would come in and maybe help them capture the snakes to do that type of work.
Okay. We have so many good questions. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of them. It's 1 o'clock, so I'm going to maybe extend this just by a little bit. We still have quite a few people on. I'll ask probably 2 or 3 more questions depending on how long you answer.
Fair enough.
So can you tell whether or not, whether and how climate change is affecting these snakes and other snakes?
Climate change, again, I've only been working with these animals for 20 years and looked at their habitat and the historic sites where we know they were from the year 1900. And even then, over the past 100 years, we haven't been able to pinpoint climate change effects on the animals themselves. But you look at, again, I mentioned the receding of the ice age, the glaciers from the last ice age. They benefited because the glaciers scraped off the habitat, the topsoil, and created the habitat that they prefer. Now, what could happen hypothetically is we get some species of brush or trees that really take off and overtake these habitats at a quicker pace than we're able to manage. But right now, I don't see that as a threat at this point, or a big way to, we don't have to sound any alarms at this point. We're able to, with every 3 to 5 years, we're able to get in and manage some of these sites and keep them in good shape for the snakes. So climate change at this point is not a factor. And I have not seen any factors from climate change over the past 100 years where we know the snakes were.
Great. Okay, thanks. All right, it is 1:02, so I'm going to ask one more quick question, which I asked Ryan a similar question when I was out in the field with him. And please keep in mind there were so many questions. If we didn't get to yours, please submit it at info@paconserve.org with the subject line webinar question, and I'll forward those to Ryan so he can answer those eventually. He is out in the field quite a bit right now, so give us a few days to get back to you. So, so the last question is, what is a bite from a Massasauga like?
I personally have not experienced it, and I hope I never do. But I know some folks that have, and I think the way I could characterize it is if you are allergic to the protein that is in rattlesnake venom, you're going to have a bad reaction. If you're not allergic to that protein, you will not have a bad reaction. And it's the same as a bee sting. Some folks, I'm not going to say it's just as bad as a bee sting, worse or better than a bee sting. I'm saying it's how each individual body reacts to that protein being injected into their bloodstream. It could be really bad if you're allergic. It could not be so bad if you're not allergic. They're a very small snake, so typically you would probably get a small dose of venom. But I don't want to test it, and I wouldn't advise anybody to test it. And the folks that I know that have gone through it, they did end up getting admitted to the hospital for multiple days. Both the folks that I know that have been bit personally have been were in the hospital for multiple days. But it has to do with how your body reacts to the venom.
All right. Well, I probably shouldn't have ended on such a downer, but we'll end by saying thank you, and thank you to everybody for attending. We hope you found this interesting and informative. And again, thanks for all the great questions. And keep an eye out for upcoming webinars. And feel free to get involved with the Conservancy. We love people who are engaged with our work. So Ryan, appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody.